In the last video, we focused on listening and nonverbal feedback, specifically in a public speaking situation. If public speakers really want to improve their speaking skills, they need to pay attention to and accept feedback. But how you give feedback to others is important, and that's what this second video is about. We will focus on why we get defensive when receiving constructive criticism, types of criticism, as well as general guidelines for providing critical feedback, including a couple of techniques that might be helpful to you. While intellectually we know that feedback is in our best interest, we often get defensive when we are on the receiving end. Defensiveness is the process of protecting our presenting self. We want to save face. We feel threatened and thus become defensive when we think the criticism is wrong or unfair, or when we dislike the source of the criticism. We don't like the person, so we deny the validity of what that person may be telling us. But a lot of times we get defensive when the criticism runs counter to who we think we are or who we want to be, especially when we desire approval from that source. And it's uncomfortable to admit that we are not the person we would like to think we are. And when we feel defensive, we may shut down and not listen or attack the criticizer. But remember, if you want to improve, you need to know what to improve. And as one student athlete told me, when a coach stops giving you criticism, you know that that coach has stopped caring. And the flip side of this is that many of us are reluctant to offer feedback to others, often being reminded of Thumper's comment in the 1942 Disney classic movie Bambi, when he said,
"If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all."
And so we end up giving only positive or no feedback. We hear the term constructive criticism a lot. If we really understand what it means, it's not quite so scary. Let's start by looking more closely at the word. Construction means to build. In the process of constructing a building, for example, you may have to take something apart so that you can build it stronger, higher, and better. Destruction, on the other hand, means to break down. In the parlance of criticism, constructive criticism is useful and intended to help or improve something, often offering solutions. You separate strengths from weaknesses and talk about both. Destructive criticism, on the other hand, intends to harm someone, not to improve them. And in the case of angry criticism, it may not even be used to harm the person it is directed at, but to help the criticizer feel better. Our goal is to provide constructive criticism, sometimes called critical feedback, which is your argued position about what worked and did not work for you in a speech. There are 5 basic underlying concepts, or guidelines here. The first is to criticize speeches, not people. It's the performance you are critiquing. If you say, "What you did wrong was," you are criticizing the person. However, "It seemed to me that the speech went astray when," is focusing on the speech. A second guideline is to be descriptive and specific. Some call it being the speaker's mirror. You might say, "I notice you relied on your notes a lot." And for specificity, "That was boring," really doesn't tell the speaker much. But "I had difficulty connecting to your speech and felt like I could be easily distracted." Or, "The examples didn't seem to apply to me." Or, "Your voice didn't sound like you were interested in what you were talking about." All of these take more thought and are considerably more helpful for the speaker. You should also be realistic by focusing on what can be changed. How can the speaker really eliminate an accent, at least in the short term? To advise getting rid of cited sources in a speech assignment where a certain number of source citations are required would also be unrealistic. However, a speaker could consider changing her organization, word choice, examples, or other support, adjust delivery, and so on. That's what the critique should focus on, things the speaker can do something about. It is also important to be tactful. Consider the timing of your response, starting with, is it an appropriate time to give the criticism? If the speaker is not open to criticism, or if the speaker will not be repeating the behavior again, then is it really helpful? Timing also includes balancing positive with negative feedback. Some suggest the sandwich approach, starting with a positive statement, then addressing some areas for improvement, and ending on a positive note, which leads to being positive in your wording. You can motivate someone to do something because you are implying that that person can really improve the behavior you're addressing, just by the way you are wording it. And avoid ordering. Suggest your information. Don't tell it. Have you thought of? Or perhaps you might? Another technique is to incorporate I statements, such as I feel, I really liked, or it seemed to me. And think about your nonverbals, your facial expression and tone of voice when you deliver your critique. Look and sound sincere. And you don't have to comment on everything. Consider triaging your critique. Perhaps mention the most important first or the easiest to fix first. Remember that people get defensive and may stop listening, which is why some recommend limiting your critiques to just 3 key areas of improvement. As you are critiquing, consider the 90-10 rule. 90% of the time, the speaker is doing something well, but 10% of the time, maybe not so well. Always look for something to compliment, and you compare it with the time the speaker perhaps didn't do so well. Your informal style works wonderfully for most of the speech, a compliment, but when it got serious in your second point, I felt you didn't understand the significance of what you were saying. Or, I really liked the way you used statistics in your speech. However, when you talked about X, you used so many of them that I really had difficulty processing what you were saying. The fifth guideline is to set specific evaluating criteria in advance. Know what you want to evaluate before you start. If possible, ask the speaker to tell you what he or she wants you to focus on. What can you critique? Consider the 4 S's: strategy, structure, support, and style. For strategy, consider if the speech follows the assignment. Is the speech and the topic appropriate for the situation and the audience? Is it relevant or useful to the audience? Does the approach work? Is it creative and memorable? And of course, is it ethical? In terms of structure, does the speaker stay on topic? Is there a clear thesis or argument that is supported in the speech? Is there a discernible organization, a clear beginning, the introduction and thesis, middle that is logically organized, and end, the conclusion? And are there transitions to make it easy to follow and cohesive? Support involves the substance or the content of the speech. What kinds of support are being used, and is the speaker using a sufficient variety of support, such as examples, statistics, testimony, etc.? Does the speaker establish and maintain credibility? Is the reasoning clear and correct? If presentation aids are used, are they appropriate, effective, and professional? And if they're not used, should they have been used? The fourth S, style, refers to a combination of many of the other 3 S's. How is the delivery? In terms of use of notes, eye contact, vocal quality, vocal disfluencies or filler phrases, rate of speech, pronunciation, gestures, posture, and so on. Language choice, is it colorful and creative as well as appropriate for the topic, the presentation, and the audience? Is the overall presentation creative? How is the energy level and projection of confidence? How does the speaker establish rapport with the audience? Is there anything about the delivery, the aids, or the presentation that might distract or annoy the audience? Now, it's one thing to pay attention to what you're seeing and hearing, but you may not be able to remember it all when the time comes to give feedback, and it helps to be organized. That's why you need to pay attention to how you record your observations so that you can remember and articulate your feedback. The first method we'll discuss is called the plus delta method. In the plus column, you record all the things that you liked about the presentation, what you want to compliment. You're hoping that by drawing attention to the strengths, the speaker will continue these behaviors. Delta is the Greek symbol for change. Notice that the columns do not represent good or bad, or strengths and weaknesses. The delta column includes what we've called constructive or critical feedback, areas that could potentially be changed. And you can also indicate inconsistencies to accommodate the 90-10 rule we've just talked about. You can make this a bit more organized if you further subdivide it into other areas like delivery and content. This may force you to pay attention to both, as you know that a good speech requires both a good delivery as well as good content. You can also adapt the Swot analysis to evaluating speeches. While this works really well for self-analysis, it can also be adapted for analyzing others. There are 4 quadrants in the analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. SWOT. Strengths and opportunities can be considered helpful, while weaknesses and threats can be considered potentially harmful. And you can also break it down into what is internal to the speech or external. For example, your strengths in a speech might be your eye contact, vocal quality, and organization, helpful and internal to the speech. And your weaknesses might be vocal disfluencies, fidgeting, or lack of gestures, potentially harmful and also internal to the speech. Opportunities, which are external to the speech itself but could be helpful, might be your research skills, your knowledge of the topic, and so on. And threats, again external to the speech but could be potentially harmful, are what blocks your way. Threats may include lack of time or motivation, or lack of knowledge of PowerPoint, for example. The value of this type of analysis is that you can analyze your weaknesses and threats and determine if you can lessen their impact or even potentially convert them to a strength or an opportunity. For example, if one of your threats is a lack of knowledge about PowerPoint, you might choose another type of presentation aid, lessening the impact, or consider it a challenge to learn how to use it, converting it into an opportunity and then potentially a strength. Quiz time! What can you do to reduce the likelihood that someone will get defensive hearing your feedback? What techniques can you use to provide specific, helpful feedback? I hope that this video lecture will help you help others with their oral presentation skills. And who knows, it may help you give feedback in other contexts as well.